Hey everyone, it's Mallory here with All About Cats, and in this week's video we're going to be taking a closer look at a service called Pawp. So you might remember that a couple of weeks ago I did a video on the best pet insurance. You can refer to the link in the cards or in the description if you want to check that video out, but it went over some of the pros and cons of getting insurance for your cat, as well as some of my favorite providers. Towards the end of that video, I mentioned a service called Pawp. Now, Pawp is not pet insurance. It's a pet insurance alternative that does a couple of things differently from pet insurance that could make it either better or worse, depending on who you are, than traditional pet insurance. So in this video, I'm going to be going into a bit more detail on the features and services that Pawp offers and which type of person I think is going to get the most out of it. There's a certain type of person who I think is going to get a lot out of Pawp and can use it as a really good alternative to traditional pet insurance. So if you're interested in learning more about this and potentially getting a discount on your first month of Pawp, I would encourage you to keep watching. So Pawp has two main services. The first is a 24/7 live Ask a Vet service. So once you start paying for Pawp, you're going to get constant access to a team of veterinarians who are able to answer your questions. So if you have questions about your cat's behavior or some symptoms that they're exhibiting, you can always contact their veterinarians via text or video call and get some information from them. And then in addition to that, you're going to get a $3,000 emergency fund each year. So it kind of works like a combination of an Ask a Vet service or a veterinary telehealth service. There are a number of these out there, and a dedicated emergency fund. And when you bring that together, you get a service that is intended to minimize the amount that you're going to spend on unnecessary vet bills, taking your cat in for a checkup, finding out that there's nothing wrong, but still spending over $100. And also, which gives you some protection in the case of an emergency. You can add up to 6 pets on a single plan, and your price is always going to be the same $19 per month. So it doesn't matter how old your cat is, it doesn't matter if you have a combination of cats and dogs on the same plan, and it doesn't matter where you live. That price is always going to be $19 per month. I'll talk a bit more about how this pricing compares to pet insurance as well as live Ask a Vet services later. But first, let's go into a bit more detail on exactly how this service works. Let's start with the live vet service. How does their live vet service or digital health clinic work? So Pawp works with a large network of veterinarians, all of whom they claim are experts in their field, well qualified, and these veterinarians are always at the ready to answer questions again via text or video call chat. So anytime that you have a question, you can go to Pawp and you can connect with one of these veterinarians. I tried it out. I connected with a veterinarian within a couple of minutes, and then they were pretty prompt in responding to my questions. Fortunately, I just had a behavioral concern, and they were able to provide some possible solutions and give me a little bit of a better idea of how I might be able to help. Now, there are a variety of other services that allow you to connect with veterinarians in real time. So for example, First Vet costs $7.50 per month and gives you access to veterinarians, so a little bit cheaper than Pawp. There's another service provided through Chewy, so if you're part of their auto ship program, you can connect with veterinarians. That's pretty cool. And on average, I found that these services tend to be a little bit more expensive than Pawp, and because they're not combined with that emergency fund, it seems like they're a little bit of a lower value. But again, Pawp is not just a live Ask a Vet service. You're also getting that $3,000 emergency fund. And this is where things get a little bit more complicated. So the emergency fund, as the name suggests, only applies to emergencies. And these emergencies need to be determined by one of their veterinarians. So if you realize that your cat seems to be poisoned, for example, you're going to have to contact their veterinarians. Fortunately, they do respond pretty quickly. And then you're going to have that veterinarian visually evaluate your cat and determine whether or not they deem that they're experiencing a serious emergency. Pawp evaluates each of these emergencies on a case-by-case basis. They say that things like life-threatening blockages, poisoning, and serious injuries are going to be eligible for that $3,000 fund. But again, it's all on a case-by-case basis. You have to have the veterinarian see your cat, hear about the symptoms, and determine if they are eligible for the fund. And then once the Pawp veterinarian determines that your cat is in a serious situation that demands veterinary attention, you have 4 hours to go and see the vet. Now again, this only applies to one emergency vet visit per year. It covers everything involved in that vet visit, from testing to medications. Everything that's on that single bill is going to be covered by Pawp, but you have to remember that there's a $3,000 cap, and then if it's under that $3,000 limit, you're going to forfeit the difference. So if you only pay $200, then you're going to lose that extra $2,800. It's done for the year. But how does this compare to just putting aside money each month for an emergency fund of your own? So if you were putting aside that $19 each month, it would take you 13 years to reach that $3,000 limit. Again, there are some tricky considerations here. You're not able to spend that money on anything besides an emergency, and you're only able to spend it on one incident. So there are some limitations that you wouldn't encounter with your own emergency fund. So when you put this all together, the emergency fund and the Ask a Vet service, it overall looks like it could be a better value than either of these things on their own. But how does it compare to pet insurance? I think that for most people, especially if you have a younger cat, pet insurance is probably going to be the better investment. But for some people, Pawp can be a superior investment, or you might want to use it as a complementary service alongside pet insurance. So for example, if I had Embrace Insurance for my cat Wessie, who's 13 years old and lives in a relatively inexpensive area, his monthly premium would be $39.18. That's assuming that we have an 80% reimbursement rate and a $300 annual deductible. So if he had some kind of emergency and my vet bill costs, let's say $3,000, I would have to pay that $300 deductible, and then I would have to pay 20% of the remaining cost. So altogether, my bill would be $840. If I had used Pawp, then I would have paid $19 per month, and then I would have the entirety of that bill covered. When we add on my monthly premium, that adds up to over $1,300 over the course of the entire year versus $228 had I been using Pawp. So in this case, it looks like Pawp could have been a little bit of a better deal for me. But again, you have to remember that I'm not getting coverage for anything outside of an emergency. I'm not able to use that fund more than once per year. So let's say Forrest had some sort of issue. I wouldn't be able to get treatment for her in the same year. I would have to pay the full bill for that. And then, of course, I wouldn't be able to get any coverage on routine care. Again, Pawp is going to provide that Ask a Vet service, so I would be able to talk with one of their veterinarians about things like if Wessie seemed to have some sort of behavioral change, or if Forrest seemed to be limping, something like that. I could talk to one of their vets and maybe save some money there. But again, it's just very difficult to say what's going to happen over the course of the year and whether or not I would end up spending more with Pawp than I would with a pet insurance. You also have to remember that long-term illnesses are what tends to cost the most. So if your cat is diagnosed with cancer or diabetes, that could end up costing you tens of thousands of dollars over time. And that's where pet insurance really tends to save you. If you get pet insurance early on before your cat is diagnosed with something huge like this, you are able to save quite a bit of money over time, and Pawp is not able to save you there. But again, that's another way Pawp can be beneficial over pet insurance. A cat who has a pre-existing condition is not going to be able to get coverage for that condition with pet insurance. Pawp is able to cover pre-existing conditions. So if your cat has an emergency related to their cancer, you are going to be able to get that covered with Pawp. So that's something to consider. That's an area where Pawp can be a benefit. And it's another reason why I think that Pawp can be a good option or promising option for senior pets. So we've talked a bit about what Pawp has to offer and how that compares to other Ask a Vet services or a savings account or pet insurance. But is it going to be a good choice for you? Theoretically, Pawp could be a good choice for anyone who is not using pet insurance or an Ask a Vet service. It can definitely boost your cat's level of healthcare by allowing you to talk with that veterinarian on a regular basis, potentially save money on both unnecessary vet bills, and bills for things that have been allowed to spiral. So you're able to catch issues, nip them in the bud, possibly, and prevent things from getting really, really expensive. That being said, there are a few people who I think are going to get a lot more out of Pawp than others. The first group of people who I think are going to get a little more out of Pawp than others are those with senior or even geriatric cats, especially if they have a pre-existing condition. So for these older cats, pet insurance premiums can go sky high, especially if you're living in an area with a high cost of living. And particularly if your cat already has a pre-existing condition that's not going to be covered by pet insurance, it can start to look like it's not really worth it. But if you still want to get some peace of mind, be able to consult with a veterinarian and know that if your cat has a life-threatening emergency, it's going to be covered, at least $3,000 of it, then Pawp could be a good option. Kind of on a similar note, it can be a good option for cats who are just not eligible for pet insurance. So for example, some cats of exotic breeds are just not eligible for pet insurance. And then let's say you have a mix of cats or even a mix of cats and dogs. You can add up to 6 pets onto the same plan and pay the same price. So if you have cats of varying ages and varying insurance eligibility, then Pawp can be a good solution that gets all of them vet consultation as well as a little bit of a safety net for emergency veterinary care. The last group of people who I think can get a lot out of Pawp are those who are not able to get their cat into a veterinarian physically. So maybe you live in an area where there's just not a vet nearby, or you can't get your cat into that carrier, you just can't wrangle them in, or maybe you just don't feel comfortable going into a veterinarian on a regular basis. Pawp allows you to talk to a vet any day of the week, anytime. You could talk to them every single day. And this ability to contact a veterinarian on a regular basis without leaving the house can potentially give your cat a much higher level of health care than they would otherwise have. And besides that, you're also getting some peace of mind. Overall, I think those are the groups of people who are going to get the most out of Pawp. But again, it's really a nuanced question. It's going to be a good option for some people and not such a great option for others. And there are plenty of other options out there. So you're going to want to consider it carefully and try to decide if you have one of those situations where Pawp is going to be better than the alternatives. If you do decide that Pawp is something that you want to explore, we're working with Pawp to provide a 20% discount for our viewers. So you can enter the coupon code AllAboutCats20 when you check out, and you'll get 20% off of your first month. So that brings your first month down from $19 to $15.20. So I think that's about it for my review of Pawp. This is a really interesting service, and I hope that you got some value out of this video. Let me know in the comments what you think of Pawp, and if you've used it, I would love to hear your feedback. And if you found this video helpful and you're interested in more reviews of services like Pawp, as well as product reviews, buyer's guides, and information on all things cats, please subscribe to the All About Cats channel. We put out new videos at least once a week, so if you would like to stay in the loop and get the news every time we upload something new, you can hit that notification bell and you get the news every time we release a new video. So thank you so much, and I'll see you next week. Bye.